okay, which I actually explained that whenever you're giving any question, the first thing you must look at is to look at the instruction. Now, instruction of the question say you should choose the correct answer from the options A to D from each of the questions below. Now, the number 22, excessive bleeding from an injury may be due to lack of what vitamin? Now, in vitamin are things that is very important in our body as a nutrient. Now, it's divided into two parts, which is fast soluble vitamin and water soluble vitamin. Now, the fast soluble vitamins are soluble in fat. They are classified as ADEC. You can put it down in your notes for easy remembrance. So I will just use that acronyms ADEC, which means vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. Vitamin A is retinol for eye. Vitamin D is calciferol or cholecalciferol for strong bone and teeth. Then vitamin E, egesterol, it helps in pregnancy. Then vitamin K, it helps in blood clotting and injury to reduce blood clotting and blood loss. So that's fast soluble vitamins. Then we have the water soluble vitamins. The water soluble vitamins are vitamins that cannot be taken or be produced from the body, but it can only be taken through meals, diet. We can get the water soluble vitamins in the diet, like B complexes, B1, B2, B3, B6, B9, and B12. Then we have vitamin C, of course. So this deficiency of these vitamins can cause a huge problem to a human. So the correct options in this number 22 is K, which is D. So vitamin K is correct answer, which means option D. So number 23, the movement of water across a permeable membrane from a weaker solution to a stronger solution is known as dash. Now, whenever you have a question and you have a semi-permeable membrane or you have selectively permeable membrane, the what should come to your mind should be a balance between the outside environment and inside environment, which is an osmosis. When you talk about osmosis, osmosis is the process of movement of water or solvent from a region of what dilute or weaker solution to a region of a stronger solution through selectively or semi-permeable membrane. And what do we call semi-permeable membrane? They are membrane that are living. They are living things where materials can pass through. So when we have living things that materials can pass through, we call it semi-permeable membrane. Example is you and I. You and I are semi-permeable membrane as water can pass through us and water can come out from us. And that's why you can sweat, okay, by the sudoriferous gland that causes sweat. Water is coming out through the semi-permeable membrane. So if you look at your skin, there are holes in which water can come out of it. I hope you understand that. So the option to number 23 is option D, which will have the osmosis. And also you should know that osmosis is mostly water, which deal with concentration gradient. What do we mean by concentration gradient? It means that the higher the concentration of the solution, the higher it will move. Okay, from the higher concentration to places that have lower concentration. So number 24, a solution which contains all the required elements in their correct proportion is known as dash. Now we have the complete culture. The complete culture is a culture solution that contains all the required elements. Now, what do you call culture in biology? Culture is a growth of nutrients, okay? It's a growth of nutrients in the lab. So we use this culture to grow something in the lab. Either we want to grow bacteria, we want to grow fungi. We don't grow virus in the lab with some nutrients because virus is more dangerous and we always want to avoid dangerous things in the lab. Like virus can replicate fast, so we don't really grow virus in any kind of lab. So it must be an advanced lab. So culture is what we use to grow something in the lab. Also, culture can also be used to grow plants. Okay, they are just some things. They are just a material that contain a lot of nutrients in which a particular microorganism can grow. So the answer is A, complete culture solution. So a complete culture solution is the one that have all the correct proportion, the elements in their correct proportion. Like fertilizer, like NPK fertilizer, one of the most popular fertilizer and effective fertilizer. So number 25 now. If you have any question, you can just unmute yourself and speak as I might not see the chat. So number 25, the places on earth which support life constituents is dash. This one is this one is straightforward. All right. From the word bio means life, right? Sphere means earth. Sphere means anything that is spherical, and earth is spherical, of course. So bio means life, and earth means sphere. So that's the answer is D. Now, another way to decipher all these things, whenever you see little is mean it means solid. Okay, little means solid. So solid and sphere, that means solid part of the earth. Whenever you see atmo, it means air. From the word atmo, it means air. Atmo and sphere, it means what the gaseous part of the earth. Then whenever you see hydro, of course, all of us know hydro means water. So hydrosphere means the water part of the earth, or the aquatic part of the earth. So in case you're not given the place on earth which supports life, which means the biosphere, and you're given water, so you know the water own is hydrosphere. So the correct option here is option D. Okay, number 26. Which of the following pairs of organisms exist as colony? Now, let's talk about the forms in which cells exist. Now, when we talk about cells, we know that cell is the smallest unit of life. It's also known as the structural and functional unit of life. Okay, now we have forms in which cells exist. Cells can exist in independent or free living, where it don't depend on anything. It's just living freely. Example is amoeba, paramecium. All these organisms, they are living independently without depending on any factors for them to survive. Like they are kind of organisms that live independently of other organisms. So that's why we call them cells that exist as an independent or free living. Now we have the cell as a colony. Okay. Now when we have cell as a colony, when we say colonization, from the word colonization, when different things come together, remember we are colonized by some certain countries, all right, and they come together to colonize us, which they left. So when we say colonization, things that comes together to form a colony. So there are cells that exist as colony. An example of those cells are volvus and pandorina. They exist as colony. Now we have cells that exist as filaments. Cells that exist as filaments are a combination of different colonies to now form different filamentous materials. Example is spirogyria. Okay, spirogyria is a cell that exists as filaments. Then we have cells that exist as a living cells, which is you and I. So you and I are cells that exist as a living cell. So the answer here is Pandorina and Volvus, which is option B. So Pandorina and Volvus is correct, option B. Now we have number 27. Growth includes the following processes except what? Now, when we talk about growth, what do we mean? Growth can be defined as a process in which there is an increase in mass. And that mass that we're talking about dry mass, not wet mass. Wet mass is not a correct indication of growth. So when we're talking about the wet mass, is not accurate indication of growth, but the dry mass is an accurate indication of growth. And that's why when we are defining growth, we must always put dry mass due to the increase in protoplasmic material. Now, when we talk about protoplasmic, what do we mean? Protoplasmic is the word is a combination of the nucleus and the cytoplasm. So when there is an increase in nucleus or the cytoplasm of a cell, there will be a growth. So that growth is what relates from the protoplasmic, which is from the nucleus and cytoplasm. So the option here, okay, we have different options. Let me explain the options. We have the mitosis. The mitosis is actually part of growth of a cell in which different cells divided into two daughter cells. When that's what we call mitosis. When we talk about meiosis is a part of a growth where we have organism that divide into four daughter cells. Then we have cells enlargement. This is part of growth of a cell. When cells enlarge, then we have differentiation. When cells differentiate, remember when we are still as a sperm and egg and as a zygote, before we are developing in the womb, we start differentiating. One cell go to the heart, one cell go to the liver as a hepatocyte, one cell go to the kidney, right, as nephrocytes. So different cells are now differentiated based on their specific function. So the option that is correct here is B, meiosis. And why is that? Growth relies on the cell multiplication, which is mitosis. Remember in your Bible, God says what? Go into the world and multiply. God did not say heart, right? Because growth is a process of multiplication. We don't add in growth, we multiply. So meiosis does not deal with multiplication, but mitosis deal with multiplication, whereby two daughter cells multiply and they keep multiplying. So physical enlargement is part of growth, and that's why you can see when if you look at 5 years ago or 10 years ago, you are not like you are right now. And cellular differentiation. Of course, I just explained differentiation that different parts of your body are separated based on the developmental stage. Now, meiosis is a specialized form of cell division exclusively for creating gametes. So, meiosis is just for gametes, which is sex cells of sperm, okay, and egg. Of course, we know that egg is one of the biggest cells in female body, okay, that have 0.03 micrometer compared to sperm. Sperm is quite small, very small, and a single drop of sperm have millions of sperm inside. So that single drop of sperm can fertilize an egg, okay, which you call the ova or ovum. Ovum is singular and ova is plural. So the main purpose of meiosis is sex cells for reproduction and not somatic growth. When we talk about somatic cells are cells that are not involved in reproduction. Why we have the meiosis is based on the sex cells which is involved in reproduction. I hope you get that. Does anyone have question concerning that? So the answer there is B. Okay. You can just type it. I will come and check it later, the question, so that we can respond to that. 27. Now let's move on to 28. Which of the following food substances will turn bright red when one with Sudan 3 solution? Now, whenever you see this kind of question, what should come to your head is what is Sudan 3 solution? Now, what do you call Sudan 3 solution? Sudan 3 solution is a type of solution that is used to test for fats. Please take note. Whenever you see Sudan 3 solution, is used to test for fats. Okay, if you have an idea on what your question is asking you, you already know the answer. So just go to the option and choose your answer. Instead of coming to the options, then go to the question, which can give you false options as the answer. So Sudan 3 solution, we have what we call translucent test and Sudan 3 solution test for fat. While test for proteins, that's when we have many. Okay, we have HNO3 test, we have ferric chloride test, we have the millions test. Those are tests for proteins. Then we have tests for starch. Of course, we can now test different types of sugar. Okay, starch itself is used. We use what is it called, iodine, which it will turn blue black. So that's a test for starch. But if we're talking about testing for sugar, we use Fairlink solution. Okay, Fairlink solution or Benedict solution is used to test for sugar. But when we talk about starch, we use iodine. Of course, most of us have seen iodine before. So the option that is correct here is C. Number 28 is C. Now, number 29, which of the following is not a component of appendicular skeleton? Now, let's explain skeleton. When we talk about skeleton, we have atlas skeleton and appendicular skeleton. Now, what do we call atlas skeleton? Atlas skeleton deal with the what? The upper part of the body, which is the head, from the neck to the head. That's where we have atlas skeleton. Then when we have appendicular skeleton are skeleton of the limb, the upper limb and the lower limb. Now, the atlas skeleton is comprised of mostly two things, okay, which is atlas and axis. Now, this atlas and axis, they are fused together by what we call odontoid process, and that's why you can move your head and you can also nod your head. So, odontoid process is a process that helps you to be able to move your head and nod your head. So when we talk about the appendicular skeleton is when we have the upper limb from the scapula, which is the shoulder blade, to the ulnar and radius, to the tibia, to the fibula, to the femur, which is the longest and the strongest bone, and the pelvic girdle, which is your your waist. And that is why if you look at the pelvic girdle of male and female, it's different. The male have lesser pelvic girdle than the female, and that's why female can carry pregnancy. If you look at the female stomach when they are pregnant, you see one thick lateral line. Now that line is actually from the pelvic girdle that makes the stomach to the womb to expand during pregnancy because they have waist. So their waist is to support their pregnancy and their body. And that's why if you look at women's hand, if you say they should straighten their hand will be bent. Their hand cannot be straightened, it will be bent. Why is that? Because of their pelvic girdle. So the pelvic girdle, the pelvis have to be enlarged, and that's why you see female with figure eight, right? They have that figure that where their pelvis, right, their hip comes out, and as a result of that, their hand cannot be straight like male. Their hand have to be bent, and that's why you see female want to carry bag. Okay, so you might have been looking at it that why is it that female just want to carry bag? It is actually biological. Okay, female carry bag because of the biological process and the way their skeleton is arranged. That's why they carry back. So the answer here is Atlas, of course. The answer is explain number 28. Buress test is carried out on food substances to indicate the presence of what? Now, this is obvious. I've explained it when I explained the Sudan 3 test. I say Buress test, HNO3 test, millions test, ferrichloride tests, they are for proteins. So whenever you have all those tests, they are for proteins. So we use Buress test for proteins. Please take note. So the answer is A. The Buress test is for proteins. Okay, let's check if you have any question. If you are good. So number 31 now, which of the following statement best describe pollination? The transfer of pollen grains from they have already given you the answer. Okay. So when you talk about pollination is just like a sexual reproduction in plants. So when we talk about sexual reproduction in plants, where anther of a plant move to the stigma of another plant. Okay. So the answer of 31 is A. Anther to stigma. That's pollination. Pollination is when we have anther to stigma. The anther contains the sperm, while the stigma contains the egg. So the egg in plants is not called the ova, is not called the ovum, is also called the oocyte, right? Because it contains the egg. So we call it the ovus. So the ovus, the egg in plant, and the sperm in plant is not called the sperm, but it's called the what? It's called the pollen grains. So that's inside the anther. So number 32 now. In which of the following capillaries to bone marrow capsule? So when we have these processes, the answer is filtration. In our kidney, filtration is very important as it helps us to remove unwanted materials and helps us to remove toxic material from our body through urine. And that's why most of our drugs that have been filtered from the kidney. So we should always take care of how we take drugs and we should not take overdose. So the answer here 32 is filtration. 33. One important characteristic of green plants is that they dash. Now, let's talk about green plants. Of course, all of us are able to survive because of green plants, and we have two types of organism in this life. We have the autotrophic organism and heterotrophic organism. Now, when we talk about autotrophic organism, they are organisms that produce their food by themselves, okay, and they do so by photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. Photosynthesis uses light, and that's why they are purely green plants. Chemosynthesis using chemicals, and that's why we cannot say they are green. They can be red, they can be, most of them are algae, so they use chemicals without light for their food. So one important characteristic of green plants is that they are autotrophic. All right, they don't have sense organs. They don't have. They are not motile. They cannot move around. They respond to stimuli. They respond very fast to stimuli. So the answer is what? Autotrophic. That's an important characteristic. Number 34. Which part of the gill of fish is involved in gaseous exchange? Now, if you look at fish very well, the answer ask yourself how a fish is surviving inside water. Now, let me briefly explain. A fish is surviving inside water by drinking the water. Now, when they drink the water, they remove oxygen from the water. Why they remove oxygen from the water? Now, the water that is left will now pass through their gills and left their body. And that's why if you buy a fish, you see something that covers that look like a scales that cover part of the air like this. Just remove it. You see that there is a hole that leads to the mouth. So that place is gills cover. So through gills filament. So that gill filament is what helps them to remove that oxygen. Then gills cover that place. So when they want to remove the water, they open the gill covers so that the water can pass out. So basically, fishes survive in water by drinking the water. So they drink water and they remove the oxygen. And that's why a freshwater fish cannot survive in salt water. If you bring a freshwater fish to salt water, it will die, and vice versa. So the answer is gill filament. Number 35, the last question. Which of the following substances has the highest amount of energy in joules per weight? Now, this is what we call calories. Calories are what? Calories is the amount of energy that is gotten from a meal's joules per kilogram, okay, which is also per weight. So the answer is here is fat. Fat gives us more amount of energy than carbohydrates. Please always take notes. And also, there are some food that are not carbohydrate, that are not protein, that classify as proteins, but probably in your secondary school, but as you proceed further in university, you'll be exposed to all those things. So fats here has more energy than carbohydrates, than proteins, than vitamin. I think you have 33 joules per kilogram of energy compared to carbohydrates of 18 joules per kilogram of energy. So I think that's the last question. So if you have any question, let me take your question before we stop the class. Is there any question? Number 33. Number
Excuse me, sir.
33, 33. The answer is C, and autotrophic. That's one of the important characteristics of a green plant. They are autotroph. Do you get that? Okay, who else have a question? 29 and 30. Okay. 29 and 30. 30, the answer of 30 is C, while 29 is B. 29 is B, 29 is B, and 30 is C. 30 is C, which is proteins. Number 31, why is the answer not C? Okay, let's look at it again. 31, we have 31. Why is the answer not C? The anther of a flower to the stigma of another flower, different species. Now, thank you. If you are choosing C, that means you are choosing one particular definition of pollination. We have two types of pollination. We have the self-pollination and the cross-pollination. The self-pollination is when the plant fertilize itself. The cross pollination is when the plant fertilizes another plant. Now, if you are choosing this C, it means you are defining cross pollination and not just no ordinary pollination. So anther to stigma is the one that defines both pollination of self and cross. So irrespective, this one is telling us about self and cross pollination, because that's what they ask us. They ask us to describe pollination and not describe cross pollination. I hope you understand that.
Yes, sir.
Feyishola, is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so who else have a question before we round up? Who else? Nobody have a question based on what I've been explaining or what I've said, or probably what you are confused with from the onset of the class, whatever it is, or probably what you want to clarify, even though it's not part of what I've been explaining. You can ask your question, then I'll explain. Number 26. Okay, let's quickly look at that before time. 26. Which of the following pairs of organisms exist as colonies? Now, we talk about colonies. Now, we have forms in which cells exist. Cells can exist as an independent or free living, which is example is amoeba, paramecium. Now, they can exist as a colony. Colony is when we have different combination of a cell. An example of that is volvos and pandorina. So volvos and pandorina are actually colonization of different cells. So colonization means coming together of different cells. Okay, that's why we have colony. Example is pandorina. So that's Vincent. Do you get that quite well? Number 26. Okay. Okay, I think that's what I explained. No, number 24. A solution which contains all the required elements in their correct proportion is actually complete cultural solution. And when we talk about cultural solutions are solutions that contains all the nutrients that is needed for that plant or microorganism to grow. Okay, like we have different solution that are culture medium, like algae. Algae are medium that helps microorganism like bacteria to grow. So for us to now be able to visibly check that bacteria, we must put it in a nutrient that it will support its growth. The same thing that is happening in plants. Of course, when we put our beans, just two or three inside under the ground, we are not just expecting that thing